Hello, friends, and welcome to the November 29th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. Let me first start off by saying that I really appreciate you joining us on the Monday after a holiday. Hope everybody had a wonderful and relaxing Thanksgiving. And since we're going to drop this episode a few hours before another big day in the lives of nonprofits, I'm going to get my shameless plug out of the way at the top today and ask you to consider supporting Texas Impact among the many, many worthwhile causes on this Giving Tuesday. We'll talk more about that at the end. But for today, we are continuing a series of important conversations that began with our a team in Glasgow covering the climate talks, the COP26 talks a few weeks ago, discussing environmental regulations. And today we're going to be talking specifically about methane. And here today with us for that conversation are Colin Leyden, the Texas Political Director for the Environmental Defense Fund. Hey, Colin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we have with us Cassandra Carmichael, the Executive Director of the National Religious Partnership for the Environment. Cassandra, thanks so much for the time today.
Thanks, Scott.
And we are going to start with Colin today. Can you explain to us methane as an issue? Talk to us about the scale. Is methane as big of a culprit in climate change as carbon, and where does Texas fit in the methane picture?
Yeah, sure, Scott. Well, first, what is methane? Because there may be some folks that aren't up to speed on methane and what it is. But methane is primarily what we most often call natural gas. So when you're cooking with natural gas on your cooktop at home, you are burning methane. It is the primary ingredient of natural gas, and it is mined. Oil and gas is taken out of the ground, and that natural gas comes out as methane and some other chemicals, constituents, and that methane is broken out and then piped into your home or to a power plant and burned as natural gas. And it is a climate pollutant. In fact, it's an extremely potent climate pollutant. It is about 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide, which is the climate pollutant we hear the most about. The good news, though, on methane is that it's short-lived. It doesn't last in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide, so it breaks down quicker. But it has a outsized impact on climate. And in fact, the latest report from the United Nations, those IPCC reports that maybe some folks have heard about, attribute about 25% of the warming that we're experiencing today to methane emissions in the atmosphere. And the good news about that, and it doesn't sound like it would be good news, but the good news about that is if we want to impact the experiences that we're feeling today on climate change, mitigating and reducing the amount of methane in the atmosphere is a way that we can have a big impact on that.
And so what's the landscape look like in Texas? How does Texas fit in this methane picture?
Yeah, well, we've been having a conversation around methane, and by we, I mean, writ large, the country, the U.S., as well as the globe, ever since really the shale boom took off about 15 years ago, starting here in Texas up in the Barnett Shale in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And the premise behind natural gas has always been, from a climate solution perspective, that replacing a coal plant with a natural gas fired plant reduces the CO2 output from that power plant by about 50%, which is true. The question is, though, is if methane is escaping in that process of drilling for oil and gas and then transporting that natural gas, how much methane is escaping and what impact is that in reducing the benefits of switching from a coal plant to a gas power plant? So there's been a lot of work and research done over the last 10 to 15 years. Environmental Defense Fund has been part of that, but there's been lots of organizations, academic organizations, as well as industry itself, in trying to figure out how much methane is escaping. So that has led over the years to various things happening. Colorado in 2014 passed really the first in the nation set of comprehensive methane rules. Pennsylvania has as well. Wyoming has done things on VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which also tackles methane. California and New Mexico just recently passed comprehensive reforms. That has not fully translated to the federal level until now with the Biden administration. The Obama administration passed methane regulations for only new sources back in 2016. Some of those were rolled back by the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, within its first, I think the first day of taking office, notified the country through an executive order that the EPA was going to tackle comprehensive methane regulations. And just a week and a half ago, I think, I'm losing track of time, they proposed their first set of series of comprehensive methane regulations. In the state of Texas, we have done nothing on methane. The state leadership has not chosen to address methane, and that's why these federal regulations are so important for Texas.
So I want to bring Cassandra into the conversation. Our audience includes Texans of faith who care about public policy issues. And this is, for many of us, we've talked about carbon for a while, but methane is new to many of us. So I guess I'm setting you up with a softball to bring in Cassandra. Should Texans of faith be paying attention to this, and why?
So absolutely, Texans should be paying attention to this issue. If you care about addressing climate change, you should care about this issue. If you care about justice, you should be looking at this issue. If you care about human health, you should look at this issue. So when I as a person of faith myself, I think methane is one of those few issues that really encapsulates everything, if you're a Christian, that we're called to do. We're called to, or if you're from other faiths, we're called to care for one another. So methane disproportionately impacts communities of color, and this is and more vulnerable populations. So methane contributes to climate change. Climate change, as we know, disproportionately impacts those communities that had the least to do with climate change. So communities of color, low-income communities, elderly communities, children. So methane has to do with reducing climate change and addressing climate justice. The other thing that's interesting about methane, not from a good perspective, but it really has, and maybe Colin can elaborate a little bit more on this, but it really has human health impacts. Colin talked about VOCs, volatile organic compounds. Those are what's released when you're working with methane and utilizing methane. And those include things that impact human health, the air we breathe. A lot of communities of color live close by some of these facilities. So in order to really live into our justice mandate, we really need to take a look at the human health aspect of methane and how to address that. And then the other thing that when we've been talking to folks about methane pollution is how can we make sure, particularly when methane is being, those industries are sited on public lands, how can we make sure that, we're being good stewards of that land? So Colin talked a lot about there's these leaks. You have to make sure that there's no methane leaks. So to be good stewards of God's creation means that we don't waste things. So methane leaks are a form of waste, and it's a form of wasting the gifts that we've been given by the Creator. So a lot of faith principles and moral implications having to do with addressing methane, which is why many people in the faith community really weigh in. And now, as Colin mentioned, there's some regulations coming up. There's a comment period that folks can weigh in on, and there's hearings this week. So it's a great time to be looking at how can addressing methane pollution be part of the overall climate justice picture.
So I know Colin brought this up as well, the regulations that are being proposed. How big are those? What are they? How big are they? And what can we be doing in response? Cassandra, will jump back with you if you.
Well, I'll let Colin take this one, and then we talk about some of the things that are going on, activities that are going on this week.
Okay.
Yeah, Scott, they're a pretty big deal. What the Obama administration did back in 2015 was only for new sources, but the majority of methane emissions come from what's known as existing sources, essentially, wells that were drilled, wells in production that was done prior to 2015. So the fact that the Biden administration has put out what we refer to as comprehensive regulations, that just basically means that it addresses all sources, including existing sources. That's a big deal. And it's really a key part of the Biden administration's climate mitigation plans. It also was featured quite a bit at the latest at COP26 as an issue, because there's now a global methane pledge going on where countries are committing to reducing 30% of their methane emissions over the coming years, because of course there's plenty of other countries that drill and use natural gas besides just the US. And so really what these regulations that have been put forth tackle are, there are leaks and what's known as fugitive methane emissions when you're drilling a well. When the well comes into production, the storage tanks for the oil often leak methane because there's gas that's mixed in with the oil. In the pipes that transport the natural gas, the methane, that also can have leaks at the processing plants, at the compressor stations. So all throughout the entire supply chain of methane, you can find these emissions. And so what these proposed regulations from the Biden administration do is tackle many, many of those point sources, including the issue of flaring, which we haven't talked about, but many people who drive through, say, West Texas or the Eagleford Shale, which is southeast of San Antonio, they'll see these flare stacks that are burning natural gas, methane, and that's during the production of oil and gas. And as Cassandra pointed out, methane is a waste issue as well as a pollution issue, and so flaring is preferable to just venting the methane in the atmosphere. But at the same time, these flares don't always work correctly. And it is a waste. So those two issues, flaring and methane leaks, are connected. And one of the proposals within the Biden administration, it's something that they've sort of set out for a later, what they call a supplemental piece of this methane regulations, is whether or not they should tackle flaring as part of these regulations. So we would encourage folks to weigh in the comment period with EPA to encourage the administration to also tackle the issue of flaring natural gas. So we can do both the waste and pollution issue on that as well.
All right, Cassandra. So now you know what's next. What do we do about this?
Well, so it's interesting that we're having this podcast this week, because there are hearings. The EPA is hosting hearings on methane pollution. Now, granted, I don't think anybody talked about methane pollution at their Thanksgiving table. Maybe Colin did or I did. But methane is not like a common topic among people. So when these hearings came up, you could sign up. Anybody can sign up to talk and to testify for about, no more than 5 minutes. You had so many people sign up to these hearings that the EPA are hosting, that the EPA had to extend its second day of hearings to make it a full day. And then they had to add an additional day. And by my last count, I think we had over 50 people of faith, religious leaders, testifying. They're going to testify this week and talk about, from a faith perspective, why addressing methane pollution, methane waste is really rooted in our scriptures and in our religions and our moral call and our faith. So big week this week, and very excited to see that many people of faith really coming forward and speaking the truth to the power.
So is it too late to get in on public comments, or what should we be doing?
It is not too late to get in on public comments. The comment period, I think, as Colin alluded to, I think it was about a week and a half ago. And it's a several month process. So folks can still write in to the EPA, submit their comments, talk about why they, what their concerns are related to methane, why they think it's important to have a comprehensive approach to addressing methane pollution and methane waste. And they can submit that to the EPA. And I think the closing period is early January.
Yeah, and I would add it's really important for the administration to hear from Texans because we, as Cassandra pointed out, we live with the oil and gas production here in the state. And so hearing our voice here in Texas is really important to the EPA. And not to mention, Texas is a little bit tricky politically for the EPA. And so the more voices that weigh in from Texas in support of what the administration is doing, regardless of what your particular angle is on it, whether it's waste or pollution or climate, important for the EPA to hear from Texas.
And Scott, the interesting thing that I was reading through the website for the comment periods, and I really noted that they're not looking for quantity, they're looking for quality. So this isn't an election where the more people that, do pro-methane comments and the more people that do anti-methane comments, that they weigh it all out. They weigh out the words that people use, the quality of their argument. And so I think it's, anybody who really has a heart and a calling to do this should submit some comments to the EPA.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Scott, I wanted to go back to a point that Cassandra brought up about air pollution and methane emissions. When you have a leak or an intentional venting situation with methane, you do have other harmful pollutants that go out with that methane, including, as Cassandra mentioned, the volatile organic chemicals, which are a contributor to ozone pollution, but also hazardous air pollutants known as HAPs, which can be things like benzene, which are known carcinogens. So people who are living near oil and gas production, these rules will be a real benefit to them. There have been studies out. There was a study that came out focusing on oil and gas production in the Eagle Ford Shale, so down south of San Antonio, looking at the impact on Hispanic women who are pregnant living near flares in the Eagle Ford and showing that there were complications and issues created with their pregnancies by living next to oil and gas facilities. So these rules really can have an impact to local air quality and local health issues.
Well, I don't want to use the president when he was formerly the vice president's full quote because I feel like I might get myself in trouble, but it seems like this is a pretty big deal. Somebody's laughing right now. Colin, is the whole ball game right now on the federal level, or is there anything else we should be watching in Texas?
Well, I'm afraid, unfortunately, on methane, I think, yes, the ball game is at the federal level. I do think that there's, depending on what the EPA decides to do on flaring, I do think there's more progress that we can make at the state level with the Railroad Commission, although they've been reluctant to address flaring. New Mexico banned the practice of routine flaring, and that's what we've been encouraging to be done here in Texas. We are, of course, right now encouraging the EPA to include that in their methane rules. But I think that there's always going to be work to be done in Texas on making sure that oil and gas industry lives up to its responsibility to be a true caretaker of what they're doing.
All right, I'm going to open it up a little bit. We've focused on methane, and the public comments seem to be the homework assignment everybody has for this week. So I hope you'll all spend some time and dig in there. But also want to open it up. We're encouraging our folks often to meet with their representatives, both at the federal, state, and local level. So before we close, is there anything from a policy perspective that you wish that Texans of Faith would be talking to their elected representatives about in the weeks and months to come?
Well, I can think of something off the top of my head. Many things, actually.
Go for it.
But I think anybody in the House of Representatives that voted for the reconciliation package and the infrastructure package, both of which were voted on in the House of Representatives recently, I think a big thank you to those representatives. And then senators urging them to vote yes on the reconciliation package that's going to hit the Senate. And both of those packages include climate justice issues, addressing climate just as it is, but also the justice aspect of it. Really important pieces, some public lands provisions in there, protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But in general, and those tend to be they have been somewhat of a partisan slog, right? But I think in general, anybody that is going to talk to their member of Congress, regardless of what party affiliation they have, is really pushing on the need that we need to address climate. Climate should not be a partisan issue. It has been. I think it doesn't need to be. It's a pro-life issue. If you look at the evangelicals, like the Evangelical Environmental Network, they're really talking about like pro-life is womb to tomb. So you really want to protect human health. So making sure that the representatives in Congress, senators, and on the House side really hear from people of faith of why it's important from a faith and moral perspective versus arguing about the science. Sorry, Colin.
No, I would echo your thoughts there on talking to and thanking if your member voted in favor of the Build Back Better Act, the reconciliation package, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure bill, both big and important climate bills. And I'll note that in the Build Back Better Act that was passed by the House, there is a methane fee included in that. It is a sort of an innovative approach to addressing methane. There will be a time gap between the implementation of the EPA rules, and if the Build Back Better Act with the methane fee were to pass, that would get implemented quicker. It's a way to reward companies that are doing things correctly with methane and, potentially penalize those who aren't. So that's just a fairness issue, right, for businesses that are actually out there trying to do the right thing here. So I would encourage folks to maybe even mention that to their member. And then the other thing I'll say, back to the EPA rule, one thing I forgot to mention, which I think is pretty innovative of the EPA to even put this forward, and they posed it really as a question as what something they might want to tackle in this supplemental piece of regulation to the methane regulation. And that's a way for citizens to actually report leaks that they see or find from the oil and gas industry as a way of helping with enforcement. There are other states that do similar type things, but this would be really a first for the EPA to do something like this. And I think it gets to that environmental justice issue, giving a little bit more power back to the people in having some sort of say over the pollution that they're experiencing. That's something worthy of commenting on, encouraging the EPA to move forward with a citizen reporting requirement within the EPA methane rules.
And Scott, I think for anybody that is talking to their representative, their member of Congress, the members are separated from the White House, but only by the length of the National Mall, which is totally walkable. And so while there is a separation of powers, there is dialogue that goes back and forth. So as representatives can communicate to the administration their support for methane regulation, I think it goes a long way. So that's another ask that people can make of their representative, is to communicate to the Biden administration that they're hearing from their constituents about this, and it's something that's important to them.
This is probably something I could have asked you before we came on air, but since we're here, any word on what the timeline might be on Build Back Better in the Senate? I mean, you might be speculating. I thought I might have missed some news in the last week or something.
I'm going to not be my prophetess of doom name sake at the moment. But, I've heard in the next couple of weeks potentially, but, people went away for the holidays and sometimes it gets a reset in terms of timeline. But I think folks are anxious to have it come to a conclusion.
Yeah, I haven't heard much different, and to echo what Cassandra said, I think that there's a real desire by the White House and congressional leadership to try and get this done before the Christmas holidays. But I think there's also some healthy skepticism around whether that'll occur, but we always hope for the best.
All right. So in addition to talking to our two senators, we'll talk to our friends in West Virginia and Arizona. I'll give you all a chance at the end. I always like to ask for shameless plugs, but anything that you want to leave us with today, anything I didn't ask or anything that you'd like to shamelessly plug before we close it out today?
Well, I'll shamelessly plug methane as an issue. I think, we talked a little bit about the importance of methane. I do want to emphasize that carbon dioxide does remain sort of our long-term challenge with climate change. But I do believe that methane offers this rare opportunity for us to really tackle a very important climate pollutant and actually make some significant change for the better on climate in the near term. And those solutions are few and far between. Climate change, as everyone probably listening to this knows, is an enormously difficult issue to tackle on many different fronts. And methane, I think, offers an opportunity for us all to do something in the very near term that will do good for the planet. So I'll leave my plug there. And always welcome to visit edf.org to learn more about methane, as well as all the other issues that we work on.
And I will also just echo what Colin said. I think methane offers this really unique opportunity for us to do something big, quick, and deliver something, some maybe immediate relief from climate change, at least get us started, and not feel like we're sort of always behind the curveball. So I'm hoping that we can get some comprehensive regulations on methane here from the administration soon. So, and thank you, Scott, for inviting us on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And you didn't offer us pie or anything or any leftover turkey, but we still came.
Next time we're together, I will owe you both some pie and turkey and all of the good things. But really, thank you both so much for this important conversation. I talked to B last week, and methane is not something that we've talked a lot about in the past, but this is a big deal. We've had a lot. Climate's been in the news over the course of the last few weeks, and we have some real opportunities to make some headway. And so I thank both of you for taking time today to help explain that to us. And listeners, y'all, we've got some work to do. You have your homework for this week. Let's see if we can make those comments. Let's see if we can have those conversations. Let's see if we can push methane to the forefront of our congregation and networks minds today and over the weeks and months to come. We have some real opportunities here. So once again, Cassandra, Colin, thanks for your time today. Thanks for the work that you're doing each and every day. Y'all are amazing.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. And friends, thank you for tuning in. If you've stayed with us this long, we hope that you'll take just a moment to leave a rating or review in your favorite podcast source so that even more friends can find this content and join the work for justice with us. And remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact social media for upcoming announcements and events, or you can always email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions about anything that you heard today. And finally, remember that if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your friends and congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Many opportunities to share this week, being that it is Giving Tuesday, so share that content with your networks. Friends, these are unprecedented times, and there is a lot of work to do. So let's get to work. Thanks, friends.